Some betrayals cut so deep they reach places in your soul you didn't even know existed. I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that doesn't just break your heart. It shatters every assumption you've ever made about the person you trusted most in the world. For 23 years, I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew what love looked like, what marriage meant, what respect felt like. I was wrong about all of it. But sometimes being wrong about someone is exactly what you need to finally be right about yourself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The restaurant was everything I had imagined it would be. Candlelit tables draped in crisp white linens, the soft murmur of intimate conversations floating through air scented with fresh roses and expensive wine. Antonio's had been booked solid for months, but somehow Michael had managed to secure us a table for our 23rd wedding anniversary. I remember feeling grateful, even impressed, that he had put in the effort to make our special night memorable. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked in and saw him already seated. In all our years together, Michael had never arrived anywhere before me. He was chronically late to everything: dinner parties, movies, even our own children's, school events. But there he was, checking his phone with the nervous energy of someone expecting important news. His usually perfect hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. "You're early," I said, sliding into the chair across from him, my black dress rustling against the velvet upholstery. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing this particular dress because it was the one he'd complimented me in at his company Christmas party just 6 months earlier. Back when I still believed his compliments meant something. He looked up from his phone with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wanted to make sure everything was perfect for tonight," he said, his voice carrying an odd undertone I couldn't identify. "You look beautiful, Elena." Elena. My name sounded different coming from his lips that night, like he was testing how it felt to say it. I ignored the strange sensation settling in my stomach and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. His fingers felt cold despite the warmth of the restaurant. 23 years, I mused, watching the candlelight flicker across his face. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. "Yeah," he said, pulling his hand away to reach for his water glass. "Time sure flies." That should have been my second clue. The Michael I married would have launched into one of his sentimental speeches about how lucky he was to have found me, how every year with me had been better than the last, how he couldn't wait to see what the future held for us. Instead, he was giving me the conversational equivalent of small talk with a stranger. Our waiter appeared, a young man with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Good evening, folks. I'm James, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" I was about to order my usual, a glass of the house red, when Michael interrupted. "We're actually waiting for one more person," he said, not meeting my eyes. "My business partner will be joining us shortly." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Your business partner?" "Richard's in town for the conference next week, and I thought it would be nice for you two to finally meet," Michael explained, his tone so casual it was almost convincing. "He's been such a huge part of expanding the firm. I've told him so. Much about you." I felt my mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. In 23 years of marriage, Michael had never once brought business associates to our anniversary dinner. In fact, he'd always made a point of keeping our personal celebrations separate from work, claiming that our anniversary was sacred time just for us. "Michael," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level, "it's our anniversary." "I know, sweetheart. But Richard's only in town for tonight, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. You'll love him. He's got this great sense of humor, and he's been dying to meet the woman who's kept me in line all these years." The waiter shifted uncomfortably beside our table, clearly sensing the tension radiating from our conversation. "Should I come back in a few minutes?" he asked quietly. "No, stay," Michael said quickly. "Richard should be here any moment." That's when I saw her. She walked through the restaurant like she owned it, all flowing auburn hair and confidence. That seemed to light up every table she passed. She was younger than me, not dramatically so, but enough that I noticed the way her skin seemed to glow in the candlelight, the way her emerald green dress hugged curves that hadn't been softened by 2 decades of marriage and motherhood. She moved with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And she was walking directly toward our table. "Michael?" Her voice was warm honey with just a hint of nervousness around the edges. She stopped, beside our table, her hand resting lightly on the back of the empty chair. My husband's face transformed. Gone was the nervous, fidgety man who'd been sitting across from me, replaced by someone animated and genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen him look at me in years. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Rachel. Rachel, this is my wife, Elena." "Rachel, not Richard. Rachel." She extended a perfectly manicured hand toward me, her smile bright and apparently sincere. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Elena. Michael talks about you all the time." I shook her hand automatically, my brain struggling to process what was happening. "I thought we were meeting Richard," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. Michael had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have simplified things a bit. Rachel's our new senior partner. She's brilliant, graduated top of her class from Northwestern, and has already brought in 3 major clients since joining the firm." Rachel slid into the chair beside Michael with easy familiarity, and I watched. My husband's eyes follow her every movement. The way he looked at her. It was the way he used to look at me when we were dating, when every gesture I made seemed to fascinate him, when he couldn't believe his luck that I'd chosen him. "Michael's been such an amazing mentor," Rachel said, her attention focused entirely on him as she spoke. "I honestly don't know what I would have done without his guidance these past few months." Past few months. The phrase echoed in my head as I watched them together, noting things I should have seen immediately. The way they sat just a little too close together. The way Rachel's hand brushed against Michael's when she reached for her menu. The way my husband's entire posture changed in her presence, becoming more animated, more alive than he'd been in our house for longer than I cared to calculate. "So, Elena," Rachel said, turning that bright smile toward me, "Michael tells me, you're an interior designer. That must be so creative and fulfilling." "It is," I managed, though my voice sounded like it was coming from someone else entirely. "I mostly work with residential clients, helping them create spaces that feel like home." "That's amazing. I'm hopeless with decorating. My apartment looks like a college dorm room. Maybe sometime you could give me some tips?" The casual presumption that we would have a relationship beyond this dinner, that she would be a continuing presence in our lives, hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at Michael, waiting for him to say something, to establish some kind of boundary, to remember that this was supposed to be our special night. Instead, he was beaming at Rachel like a proud father showing off his favorite child. "Rachel just bought a condo downtown," he explained to me. "One of those new high-rises with the floor-to-ceiling windows. The views are incredible." "You've seen her apartment?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Oh, just briefly," Michael said quickly. "I helped her move some furniture last weekend. Heavy stuff, you know how it is." No, I didn't. Know how it was. In 23 years of marriage, Michael had never once offered to help any of his colleagues move. He barely helped when we moved our own children to college. But apparently, Rachel's furniture was worth his weekend time. Our waiter returned, and I watched in a kind of detached fascination as Michael and Rachel fell into an easy rhythm of shared glances and inside jokes while ordering their meals. They debated wine selections like old friends, laughed about some story involving their office that I wasn't part of, and generally behaved like I was an audience member watching their private show. "The salmon looks good," I said to no one in particular, since neither of them was paying attention to my menu deliberations. "Oh, the salmon here is incredible," Rachel enthused. "Michael brought me here for lunch last month when I closed the Patterson account. Best fish I've ever had." Michael brought her here, to our restaurant, the place where he'd proposed to me 24 years ago, where we'd celebrated every major milestone in our relationship, where we'd brought our children for their birthday dinners and graduation celebrations. He'd brought her here for lunch like it was just another Tuesday. "That's nice," I said quietly, setting down my menu with hands that had developed a slight tremor. The conversation flowed around me as if I were a piece of furniture, present but not really participating. They talked about office politics, upcoming cases, colleagues I'd never heard of, despite the fact that Michael used to come home and tell me about his workday in detail. They had shared experiences, shared jokes, a shared language that excluded me completely. I found myself studying them with the detached observation of an anthropologist. The way Rachel laughed at everything Michael said, even things that weren't particularly funny. The way Michael's voice took on a different quality when he spoke to her. Younger somehow, more energetic. The way they both seemed to forget I was. There for minutes at a time, lost in their own little bubble of connection. "Elena?" Rachel's voice cut through my observation. "I asked if you had any children?" "Two," I replied automatically. "Sarah's 21, finishing up her junior year at State, and David just turned 19. He's at community college figuring out what he wants to study." "That's wonderful. It must be so rewarding to watch them become adults." There was something in her tone that suggested she was making polite conversation rather than expressing genuine interest. The kind of tone you use when you're asking about someone's pet or their garden, acknowledging that it matters to them without it particularly mattering to you. "It is," I said, "though the house feels pretty quiet with both of them away at school." "I bet," Michael said, but he wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was watching Rachel as she sampled the wine the waiter had brought, noting her approval with the kind of attention he used to reserve for my opinions. Our meals arrived, and I cut through my salmon mechanically, tasting nothing. The conversation continued to flow around me, occasionally including me in the most perfunctory way possible. Rachel asked about my work, my hobbies, my thoughts on various topics, but always in a way that felt like checking items off a list rather than genuine curiosity. Michael, meanwhile, seemed to hang on her every word. When she mentioned her morning yoga routine, he expressed interest in trying yoga himself, something he'd shown zero interest in when I'd suggested we take classes together 3 years earlier. When she talked about her love of hiking, he reminisced about trails he'd explored in college, trails he'd never mentioned in all our years together, despite my own love of outdoor activities. It was like watching my husband discover interests and personality traits I'd never known he possessed, all sparked by the presence of this woman who was young enough to be our daughter. "So, how long have you two been working together?" I asked during a lull in their conversation about some legal strategy I didn't understand. "About 8 months now," Rachel replied. "Though it feels like longer, doesn't it, Michael? We just clicked right away." "We did," Michael agreed, his voice warm with affection. "It's rare to find someone who just gets your work style so completely." 8 months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thought back over the past 8 months, trying to remember when Michael's behavior had started to change. When he'd begun staying later at the office, taking more business trips, seeming distracted when he was home. When he'd stopped telling me about his day, stopped asking about mine, stopped seeming interested in the small details of our shared life. "It's wonderful when you find that kind of professional connection," I said carefully. "Especially in a demanding field like law." "Exactly," Rachel said, reaching over to touch Michael's arm briefly. We just work so well together. Finish each other's sentences, anticipate what the other one needs. It makes everything so much more efficient. They finished each other's sentences. The phrase lodged in my chest like a splinter. Michael and I used to finish each other's sentences. We used to anticipate each other's needs. When had that stopped? When had I stopped paying attention to the gradual erosion of our connection? I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from the table to collect my thoughts. In the mirror, I studied my reflection, a 45-year-old woman who took care of herself but couldn't compete with 20-something skin and the glow of new attraction. My dark hair was styled perfectly, my makeup applied with care, my dress flattering and appropriate. I looked exactly like what I was, a successful, attractive, middle-aged woman. But next to Rachel's effortless beauty and youthful energy, I felt invisible. When I returned to the table, I found them leaning toward each other in conversation, their heads close together as they examined something on Michael's phone. They sprang apart when they saw me approaching, but not before I caught the guilty looks that flashed across both their faces. Just showing Rachel the photos from David's high school graduation, Michael explained quickly. That's nice, I said, settling back into my chair. Though I'm surprised you have those on your phone. You usually delete photos after a few weeks. I've been better about keeping them lately, he said, not meeting my eyes. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and growing discomfort. I found myself watching them like I was gathering evidence for a case I didn't want to build. The way Rachel's hand lingered when she passed Michael the salt. The way he laughed just a little too hard at her jokes. The way they both seemed to light up when they looked at each other and dim slightly when they remembered I was there. By the time our dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé Michael had ordered to share with Rachel, not me, I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. They were so absorbed in each other that they probably wouldn't have noticed if I'd simply gotten up and walked away. This is incredible, Rachel moaned as she tasted the dessert. Michael, you have to try this. She held out her spoon toward him, and I watched my husband lean forward to taste chocolate from another woman's spoon at our anniversary dinner. The intimacy of the gesture was like a slap across the face. Amazing, he agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. We'll have to remember this place. We'll have to remember this place. Not, you should come back here, or I'll have to bring Elena here again. We, as in the two of them, together. I set down my coffee cup with slightly more force than necessary, causing both of them to look at me with surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was there. Is everything all right, Elena? Rachel asked, her brow furrowed with what appeared to be genuine concern. Everything was not all right. Everything was so far from all right that I couldn't even see all right from where I was sitting. My husband had brought his mistress, because that's what she was, whether they'd admitted it to themselves or not, to our anniversary dinner. He was sharing dessert with her, making future plans with her, being more animated and engaged with her than he'd been with me in months. But instead of saying any of that, I smiled the smile I'd perfected over 23 years of marriage, the one that said everything was fine even when it wasn't, the one that kept the peace even when peace was the last thing I felt. I'm just tired, I said. It's been a long day. Of course, Michael said, finally looking at me with something approaching the attention he'd been giving Rachel all evening. We should probably get the check soon. Oh, don't rush on my account, Rachel said quickly. I'm having such a wonderful time getting to know Elena. It's so nice to finally put a face to all the stories Michael tells about you. All the stories Michael tells about me. I wondered what stories those were, and when he found time to tell. Them between all their shared lunches and moving assistants and professional clicking. What kinds of stories? I asked, curious despite myself. Rachel's smile faltered slightly, and she glanced at Michael as if seeking guidance. Oh, just general things. How you two met? What you're like? Family stories? General things. Vague enough to mean nothing. Specific enough to suggest Michael had been talking about me to her, though probably not in the glowing terms a husband should use when describing his wife to his colleagues. The waiter appeared with our check, and I reached for my purse automatically. After 23 years of marriage, paying for anniversary dinners had become routine. We took turns, or split it, or whoever had easier access to their card covered it. Simple, practiced, unremarkable. But Michael was already handing over his credit card to the waiter, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't our joint card, the one we used for shared expenses and special occasions. It was his personal card, the one he used for his individual purchases. Our anniversary dinner wasn't a shared expense anymore. It was his expense, his choice, his decision to include a third party, his decision about how the evening would unfold, his decision about who deserved his attention and affection. I was just along for the ride. As we waited for the check to be processed, Rachel excused herself to the restroom, and for the first time all evening, Michael and I were alone together. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that hadn't been said. "She seems nice," I said finally, because someone had to say something. "She is," Michael replied, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Really smart, great instincts. The firm is lucky to have her." "And you're lucky to work with her." "I am," he agreed, still not looking at me. "It's been refreshing to have someone who really understands the business, who can challenge me intellectually." Refreshing, as if his life with me had become stale, predictable, something that needed the injection of new energy that only Rachel could provide. "How long do you think she'll stay with the firm?" I asked, keeping my tone casual despite the fact that my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Hopefully a long time," Michael said. "She's the kind of person you want to keep around, you know? She makes everything better just by being there." She makes everything better just by being there. When was the last time Michael had said something like that about me? When was the last time my presence had made anything better for him, rather than just being the familiar backdrop to his daily life? Rachel returned from the restroom, refreshing her lipstick and smoothing her hair, looking as effortless and beautiful as she had when she first walked in. The waiter brought back Michael's card and the receipt, and I watched my husband calculate the tip with the kind of careful attention he usually reserved for important legal documents. "Thank you so much for dinner, Michael," Rachel said as we gathered our things. "And Elena, it was truly wonderful meeting you. I hope we can do this again sometime." Again. She was already planning our next encounter, assuming there would be, one, confident in her place in our lives going forward. "Of course," I heard myself say, though the words felt like they were coming from someone else entirely. "It was lovely meeting you too." We walked out of the restaurant together, an awkward trio in the warm evening air. Michael and Rachel continued their easy conversation while I trailed slightly behind, watching the way they moved together with unconscious synchronization. "Where are you parked?" Michael asked Rachel as we reached the street. "Just around the corner," she replied. "Thank you again for such a lovely evening. I'll see you Monday morning." She hugged him goodbye. Not a professional handshake or a casual wave, but a real hug, her arms around his neck, his hands on her waist, lasting just a beat longer than appropriate. Then she turned to me with that bright smile. "Elena, such a pleasure," she said, offering me a much more restrained hug. "I hope we'll see each other again soon." Then she was walking away, her heels clicking confidently on the sidewalk, leaving the scent of expensive perfume hanging in the air between. Michael and me, we watched her go in silence, and I saw something in Michael's expression that I hadn't seen in years. Longing. Pure, undisguised longing as he watched another woman walk away from him. "Ready to head home?" he asked, finally turning his attention back to me. "Sure," I said, though I felt anything but ready. Ready implied being prepared for what came next, and I had no idea what came next. How do you go home with someone who's just spent the evening making it clear that you're no longer the center of their world? How do you share a bed with someone who's thinking about someone else? The drive home was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that suggests both people have too much to say and no safe way to say it. Michael turned on the radio, some classic rock station that filled the space between us with guitar solos and lyrics about lost love and new beginnings. When we pulled into our driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had when we'd left 3 hours earlier. Same porch light glowing warm and welcoming, same carefully maintained garden, same life we'd built together over more than 2 decades. But somehow, everything had changed. "That was a nice evening," Michael said as we walked up the front steps, his tone suggesting he actually believed it. "Was it?" I asked, stopping with my hand on the front door handle. He looked at me with surprise, as if the question hadn't occurred to him. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Where did I even begin? How do you explain to someone that they've just inflicted one of the most painful evenings of your life while apparently having a wonderful time themselves? "Never mind," I said, unlocking the door and stepping into our house. "I'm tired. I think I'll head straight to bed." "Okay," Michael said, but he was already pulling out his phone, probably to text Rachel about what a great time he'd had. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 23 years and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My husband had brought another woman to our anniversary dinner. He'd been more engaged, more animated, more himself with her than he'd been with me in months. And apparently, he thought it had been a lovely evening. I changed into my nightgown mechanically, going through the motions of my bedtime routine while my mind raced. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand explanations and apologies and promises that things would change. Part of me wanted to pretend the evening had never happened, to go back to the comfortable illusion that our marriage was simply going through a rough patch that would resolve itself with time and patience. But mostly, I wanted to understand how I'd become so invisible in my own life that my husband could bring his mistress to our anniversary dinner and think I wouldn't mind. I heard Michael coming up the stairs, his footsteps familiar on the creaky floorboard outside our bedroom door. He came in quietly, probably thinking I was already asleep, and I listened to him getting ready for bed with the same mechanical efficiency I'd just used. When he slipped into bed beside me, I felt the mattress dip with his weight, felt the warmth of his body near mine, smelled the cologne he'd put on for our special evening that had turned out to be special for all the wrong reasons. "Good night, Elena," he whispered into the darkness. "Good night," I whispered back, though sleep felt impossible. I lay there in the dark, listening to Michael's breathing gradually even out as he fell asleep, apparently untroubled by the events of the evening. And as I stared at the ceiling of our bedroom, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. For 23 years, I'd been Elena Martinez, devoted wife and mother, successful interior designer, woman who made other people's lives more beautiful and comfortable. I'd been the supportive spouse, the understanding partner, the one who adapted and accommodated and made space for everyone else's needs and desires. But tonight, watching my husband share dessert with another woman at our anniversary dinner, I'd caught a glimpse of someone else. Someone who was tired of being invisible, tired of being taken for granted, tired of making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. I didn't know what I was going to do with this new awareness. I didn't know how to be the woman who demanded better, who refused to accept scraps of attention from her own husband, who wouldn't smile politely while being replaced right in front of her face. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Elena Martinez was done being a supporting character in her own life story. And tomorrow, I was going to figure out exactly what that meant. I woke up the next morning with the clarity that sometimes comes after a terrible night's sleep. Michael was already gone. I could hear the shower running in the guest bathroom, which he'd been using more frequently lately. claiming our ensuite shower had better water pressure for his morning routine. Another small change I'd rationalized, away instead of questioning. The house felt different in the morning light. Not physically, of course. Same cream-colored walls I'd painted 3 years ago. Same family photos lining the hallway. Same comfortable furniture I'd carefully selected to create a warm, welcoming home. But there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't name, like the air before a thunderstorm when you can feel the electricity building even though the sky still looks clear. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen island, the same spot where I'd planned countless family dinners, helped with homework assignments, and listened to my children's daily dramas and triumphs. This morning, though, I found myself really looking at the space around me. When had I stopped seeing my own home? When had it become just the backdrop to a life I was sleepwalking through? My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Sarah. "How was the anniversary dinner? Did Dad surprise you with anything special?" I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to answer. Did he surprise me? Absolutely. Just not in the way Sarah was imagining. I could picture her in her dorm room, probably between classes, expecting to hear about romantic gestures and renewed declarations of love. The kind of stories she could share with her friends. Proof that true love could last decades, and that her parents were still crazy about each other. "It was definitely memorable," I typed back. "Tell me about your week. How's the psychology paper coming along?" Deflection had become my specialty over the years. When people asked how I was doing, I asked about them instead. When conversations veered toward topics that might expose the growing cracks in my marriage, I steered them toward safer ground. I'd become an expert at managing other people's perceptions while losing track of my own reality. Michael came downstairs dressed for work, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing the navy suit I'd helped him pick out last Christmas. He looked handsome and successful, and like the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But now, I found myself studying him differently, looking for signs of the person who'd spent our anniversary dinner gazing adoringly at another woman. "Morning," he said, grabbing his travel mug and filling it with coffee. "I've got that client meeting this morning, so I'll probably be late tonight." "Which client?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "The Morrison case. Rachel thinks we should approach it differently, so we're staying after hours to go through the files." "Rachel thinks?" Of course she did. I wondered, when Rachel's opinion had become more valuable than mine, when her insights had started carrying more weight than the thoughts of the woman who'd been by his side for over 2 decades. "That's nice that you have such a collaborative working relationship," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Michael paused in his coffee preparation, glancing at me with what might have been suspicion. "It is. She brings a fresh perspective to things." Fresh perspective. There was that word again. Fresh. Like everything else in his life had gone stale and needed the injection of newness that only Rachel could provide. "Well, have a good day," I said, turning back to my phone as if I had important messages to attend to. He kissed the top of my head absently, the kind of perfunctory gesture spouses make out of habit rather than affection, and headed for the garage. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway and found myself wondering if he was thinking about me at all or if his mind had already moved on to his fresh perspective waiting at the office. I had 3 client consultations scheduled for the day, which meant I needed to put on my professional face and pretend that my personal life wasn't imploding. Interior design required a particular kind of emotional intelligence, the ability to understand what people really wanted even when they couldn't articulate it themselves, to translate their vague longings into concrete spaces that would make them happy. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent years creating beautiful, functional homes for other people, while apparently losing sight of what I needed in my own life. My first appointment was with Linda Chen, a recently divorced woman in her 50s, who wanted to completely redecorate her new condo. She'd moved out of the family home she'd shared with her ex-husband and was determined to create a space that reflected who she was becoming rather than who she'd been. "I want it to feel like me," she explained as we walked through her empty living room. "For 30 years, every decorating decision was a compromise. He wanted leather furniture, I wanted fabric. He preferred dark colors, I loved light and bright. We always met in the middle, and somehow that middle ground never felt like home to either of us." I nodded, taking notes and trying to ignore how closely her words mirrored my own experience. "What does feeling like you look like in practical terms?" Linda's face lit up. "Color. Lots of it. I want to walk into this place and feel joy, not just comfort. I want artwork that makes me think, not just something that matches the sofa. I want to stop apologizing for taking up space." Stop apologizing for taking up space. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. When had I started apologizing for taking up space? When had my preferences become suggestions rather than equal considerations? When had I started making myself smaller to accommodate Michael's growing need for something different? Something fresh? We spent 2 hours going through magazines and fabric samples, and I found myself living vicariously through Linda's excitement about creating a space that was entirely hers. No compromises, no careful negotiations, no wondering whether someone else would approve of her choices. "You know what the best part is?" Linda said as I was packing up my samples. "I don't have to explain my decisions to anyone. If I want hot pink throw pillows, I can have hot pink throw pillows. If I want to hang my grandmother's painting in the dining room, I don't need permission." "That sounds incredibly liberating," I said, and I meant it. It is. Scary, but liberating. I spent so many years being half of a couple that I forgot what it felt like to be a whole person by myself. After I left Linda's condo, I sat in my car for several minutes thinking about what she'd said. Half of a couple versus a whole person. Had I become half a person? Had I defined myself so completely in relation to Michael and our children that I'd lost track of who Elena Martinez was when she wasn't being wife and mother? My next appointment was with the Hendersons, a young couple expecting their first baby. They wanted to convert their guest room into a nursery, and their excitement was infectious. They held hands while we talked, finishing each other's sentences and sharing those private smiles that new couples have when they're still amazed by their good fortune in finding each other. Watching them together was like looking at a photograph of Michael and me from 24 years ago. We'd been like that once, completely absorbed in each other, planning our future with the confidence of people who believed love was enough to overcome any obstacle. When had we stopped holding hands during conversations with other people? When had we stopped sharing those private smiles that acknowledged our special connection? When had we become two people who happened to live in the same house rather than partners building a life together? "We want the room to feel peaceful but not boring," Jessica Henderson explained, her hand resting protectively on her barely visible bump. "A place where we can all feel calm and happy." "Any color preferences?" I asked, making notes about lighting and furniture placement. "We're keeping the gender a surprise," Mark Henderson said, squeezing his wife's hand. "So we want something that could work for either, but still has personality." They spent the next hour debating paint colors and furniture options with the kind of careful consideration most people reserve for major financial decisions. Everything mattered to them, because this was their first baby, their first home together, their first step into the unknown territory of parenthood. I remembered feeling that way about every decision Michael and I made in our early years together. Which apartment to rent, which furniture to buy, how to arrange our wedding registry. Everything had felt significant because we were building something together, creating the foundation for the life we wanted to share. Now, most of our decisions were made independently. Michael bought new clothes without asking my opinion. I redecorated rooms without consulting him. We'd stopped collaborating on the small choices that add up to a shared life, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. My final appointment of the day was with Robert Castellanos, a widower in his 60s who'd recently moved to a retirement community and wanted help making his new apartment feel like home. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and he was struggling to create a space that honored their life together, while acknowledging his new reality as a single person. "Margaret always handled the decorating," he explained as we walked through his surprisingly spacious apartment. "I never paid much attention to it, figured it was her department. But now I realize how much thought went into making our house feel welcoming. I want to do right by that, you know? Create something she would have approved of." His love for his late wife was evident in every word he spoke about her. Even 2 years after her death, his voice softened when he mentioned her name, and his eyes would get a distant look, as if he was seeing memories instead of the present moment. "Tell me about Margaret," I said, settling into a chair across from him. "What did she love? What made her happy?" Robert's face transformed as he talked about his wife. She'd been a teacher who loved children and books and gardens. She'd collected vintage teacups and always had fresh flowers in the house. She'd made their home a gathering place for friends and family. Someone who believed that good food and comfortable furniture could solve most of the world's problems. "She had this way of making everyone feel welcome," Robert said. "Didn't matter if you were the neighbor kid or the company president. Margaret treated everyone like they mattered. Our house was always full of people because she made it a place where people wanted to be." As he talked, I found myself thinking about my own marriage. When had Michael and I stopped making each other feel welcome? When had our home stopped being a place we were excited to return to at the end of the day? When had we become polite roommates instead of partners who were genuinely interested in each other's thoughts and experiences? "I want to honor that," Robert continued. "Create a space that would make her proud, but also something I can live with. I'm still figuring out who I am without her, you know? 68 years old, and I'm having to learn how to be myself instead of half of us." There it was again. That idea of being half versus being whole. How many people spent years defining themselves in relation to someone else, only to wake up one day and realize they'd lost track of their individual identity? We spent 2 hours going through his belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate, talking about ways to arrange his furniture that would encourage the kind of social gatherings Margaret had loved while still feeling comfortable for one person. "You know what I've learned?" Robert said as I was preparing to leave. "Love doesn't mean disappearing into someone else. Margaret and I were happy because we were both whole people who chose to share our lives. I think maybe that's what I'm trying to get back to, being whole again." Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert's words. Love doesn't mean disappearing into someone else. Had I disappeared into Michael? Had I become so focused on being the perfect wife and mother that I'd lost track of Elena, the individual woman with her own dreams and preferences and boundaries? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Michael's late night at the office, going through files with Rachel. I wondered if they were really working, or if they were sharing another intimate meal, discovering more things they had in common, building the kind of connection that made everything else feel like background noise. I found a note on the kitchen counter written in Michael's familiar handwriting. "Don't wait up. This is going to take longer than expected. See you in the morning." Don't wait up. When had that become his default assumption? That I wouldn't miss his company, wouldn't want to hear about his day, wouldn't care whether he came home to an empty house or one where someone was glad to see him? I heated up leftover Chinese food and ate dinner alone at our kitchen table, surrounded by the comfortable silence of our well-appointed home. But for the first time in years, the silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of two people who were secure in their connection. It was the hollow quiet of someone who'd been forgotten. After dinner, I found myself walking through our house as if I were seeing it for the first time. 23 years of shared decisions and accumulated possessions. Wedding photos where we looked impossibly young and optimistic. Family vacation pictures documenting the years when our children were small, and our biggest concerns were sunscreen and bedtimes. Furniture we'd chosen together, artwork we'd agreed on, a lifetime of compromise and collaboration. But looking around now, I realized that most of the recent additions to our home had been my choices alone. Michael had stopped offering opinions about throw pillows and wall colors years ago, claiming he trusted my judgment and was happy with whatever I decided. I'd taken that as a compliment, proof that he respected my professional expertise and was secure enough in our relationship not to need control over every detail. Now I wondered if it was actually evidence that he'd stopped caring about our shared space, stopped seeing our home as something we were creating together. Maybe his lack of input wasn't trust. Maybe it was indifference. My phone rang around 9:30. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation that still sometimes caught me off guard after all these years of marriage. "Hey," I said, settling onto our living room couch with a cup of tea. "Hi, just wanted to let you know we're wrapping up here soon. This case is more complex than we initially thought, but Rachel has some really innovative ideas about how to approach it." Rachel has innovative ideas. Not, "we've come up with some solutions," or "I figured out a new strategy." Rachel was the source of innovation and insight, while Michael was apparently just along for the ride. "That's great," I said. "What kind of ideas?" There was a pause, and I could almost feel Michael's surprise that I'd asked for details. When had I stopped? Asking about his work? When had we reduced our conversations to logistics and schedules, skipping over the substance of our daily experiences? "Well, it's pretty technical," he said finally. "Legal stuff that would probably bore you. Legal stuff that would bore me." As if I were incapable of understanding the work that consumed most of his waking hours. As if my 23 years of marriage to a lawyer had taught me nothing about the profession that supported our family. "Try me," I said. "I might surprise you." Another pause. "Rachel thinks we should focus on the procedural angle rather than trying to prove intent. It's a smarter strategy because the burden of proof is different." He explained the case to me in broad strokes, and I found myself genuinely interested in the legal complexities involved. But what struck me more than the details was how his voice changed when he talked about Rachel's contributions. There was admiration there, excitement, the kind of intellectual engagement I hadn't heard from him in years. "She sounds very talented," I said when he finished explaining. "She is, really gifted. I think she's going to be a major asset to the firm." "And to you personally?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "What do you mean?" Michael asked, but his voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to buy time to formulate an answer. "I mean, it's nice that you have such a good working relationship. Someone who challenges you intellectually." "Yes," he said slowly. "It is nice." We talked for a few more minutes about logistics, what time he'd be home, whether I needed him to pick up anything on his way, the usual domestic details that keep a household running. But underneath the ordinary conversation, I could feel something shifting between us. A new awareness, perhaps, or maybe just the acknowledgement of things that had been true for a while but never spoken aloud. After we hung up, I sat in our living room thinking about intellectual challenges and professional admiration, and the way people can slowly drift apart without either of them noticing until the distance becomes impossible to ignore. My phone buzzed with a text from my son David. "Mom, weird question, but is everything okay with you and Dad? Sarah said the anniversary dinner was memorable, which doesn't sound like her usual gushing about how cute you guys are." Smart kids. Both of them had inherited their father's analytical mind and their mother's emotional intelligence. I should have known they'd pick up on subtle cues that something was off. "Everything's fine, honey," I texted back. "Just tired. How are classes?" "Going?" Another deflection. Another careful redirection away from topics that might require me to admit that I didn't have answers, that the life I'd spent decades building was showing cracks I didn't know how to repair. But as I typed the words, "Everything's fine," I realized I was lying to my own son. Everything wasn't fine. Everything hadn't been fine for a while, and pretending otherwise wasn't protecting anyone. It was just prolonging the inevitable moment when I'd have to face the truth about what my marriage had become. I spent the rest of the evening reading, trying to lose myself in someone else's story, so I wouldn't have to think about my own. But my mind kept wandering back to my conversations with clients that day. Linda, who was creating a space that reflected who she was becoming. The Hendersons, who were building something together with excitement and collaboration. Robert, who was learning to be whole again after years of being half of a couple. All of them were in transition, moving from one phase of life to another with intentionality and hope. All of them knew what they wanted and were taking active steps to create it. What did I want? When was the last time I'd asked myself that question and really listened to the answer? Michael came home around 11, moving quietly through the house like he was trying not to wake me. I heard him in the kitchen, probably getting a glass of water and checking the mail. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of him brushing his teeth in the guest bathroom, the click of the spare bedroom door closing. The spare bedroom. When had that become his regular sleeping arrangement? He'd started using it occasionally, a few months ago, claiming he didn't want to wake me when he had early morning calls or late nights at the office. But sometime in the past few weeks, it had become his default choice rather than the exception. We were married people living like roommates, sharing a house but not a life. And somehow, I'd let it happen gradually enough that I hadn't noticed until I was sitting alone in our bedroom, listening to my husband settle in for the night, 2 doors down the hall. I thought about getting up and going to talk to him, forcing the conversation we'd been avoiding for months. But what would I say? That I felt invisible in my own marriage? That I was tired of being taken for granted? That I suspected he was emotionally, if not physically, involved with his young, attractive colleague? All of those things were true, but saying them out loud would require me to admit that I'd been complicit in my own disappearance. I'd accepted less and less attention, fewer and fewer signs of affection, a gradual reduction in intimacy and connection without ever demanding better. I'd trained my husband to treat me like an afterthought by accepting afterthought treatment for so long that it had become our normal. The next morning brought another carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Michael was up and gone before I made it to the kitchen, leaving only the faint scent of his cologne and a coffee mug in the sink as evidence that he'd been there at all. But this time, instead of rationalizing his absence or finding ways to fill the empty space he'd left behind, I found myself getting angry. Not the explosive, dramatic anger that burns hot and fast, but the steady, determined anger that builds slowly and doesn't burn out. I was angry at Michael for bringing another woman to our anniversary dinner and thinking I wouldn't mind. I was angry at myself for smiling and making polite conversation instead of asking the questions that needed to be asked. I was angry at the situation we'd created through years of small compromises and gradual drift, and the kind of benign neglect that kills marriages just as effectively as dramatic betrayals. But mostly, I was angry that I'd spent so many years being accommodating and understanding and flexible that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. My phone rang while I was getting dressed for work. Rachel's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it, wondering what possible reason Michael's colleague could have for calling me directly. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Elena? Hi, it's Rachel. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Michael." Of course she did. Michael had given my personal information to the woman he was clearly infatuated with, probably without thinking to ask if I was comfortable with that level of access to my private life. "What can I do for you, Rachel?" "I wanted to thank you again for last night," she said, her voice warm and friendly. It was so wonderful getting to know you better. Michael talks about you all the time, and it was nice to finally put a face to all his stories. Michael talks about me all the time. That phrase again, vague enough to mean nothing while sounding like something significant. It was lovely meeting you too, I said, falling back on automatic politeness. Actually, I was calling because I have a favor to ask. I know you're an interior designer, and I'm completely hopeless when it comes to decorating. I was wondering if you might be willing to give me some advice about my new place. I could pay you, of course. I just thought it might be fun to work together. Work together. The audacity of the request took my breath away. Michael's mistress wanted to hire me to decorate the apartment where she was probably planning to seduce my husband, and she thought it might be fun for us to collaborate on the project. That's very flattering, I said carefully, but I'm completely booked for the next several months. Oh, Rachel said, and I could hear genuine disappointment in her voice. Well, maybe when your schedule opens up. I'm not in any hurry. She wasn't in any hurry because she was already getting what she wanted from Michael. The apartment was just a bonus, a place where they could continue building their connection without the inconvenience of a wife watching from across the dinner table. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Great. And Elena, I hope we can be friends. I know it might be weird, me being so much younger and working with Michael, but I really enjoyed talking with you last night. You seem like such a strong, accomplished woman. Strong, accomplished woman. The kind of compliment that sounded generous while actually being dismissive. I was accomplished in the way that older women were accomplished. Established, settled, no longer a threat to younger women who were just beginning to discover their power. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed thinking about Rachel's call. The easy assumption that I'd want to help her create a beautiful space. The casual mention of my age difference with her, as if it were an obstacle to be overcome rather than a natural boundary. The confident expectation that we could be friends, as if I should be grateful for her attention and approval. Everything about the call was wrong, but it had been delivered with such apparent sincerity that I almost questioned my own instincts. Almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that Rachel was just a friendly young woman trying to connect with her colleague's wife. Almost. But I'd spent too many years reading people's unspoken needs and hidden motivations in my work, as a designer. I knew when someone was trying to manage my perceptions, and Rachel's call had been a masterclass in manipulation disguised as friendship. She wanted to neutralize me as a threat by turning me into an ally. Get me invested in her success, her happiness, her future. Make me complicit in my own replacement by convincing me that we were all on the same team. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Rachel wasn't just attracted to my husband. She was actively working to replace me. And she was smart enough to know that the best way to eliminate competition wasn't to fight it directly, but to co-opt it. Make me feel like I was part of the process rather than its victim. For the first time since our disastrous anniversary dinner, I found myself smiling. Because Rachel had made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. She'd looked at me and seen a middle-aged wife who would be flattered by her attention, grateful for her friendship, too polite and accommodating to cause problems. She'd seen someone who could be managed and manipulated and ultimately discarded without putting up much of a fight. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Elena Martinez hadn't built a successful design business by being a pushover. I hadn't. Raised two confident, independent children by avoiding difficult conversations. I hadn't survived my husband's midlife crisis by being weak or naive or easily fooled. I'd just been choosing my battles carefully, waiting for the right moment, to fight for what mattered most. And now I knew exactly what that fight was going to look like. The plan came to me while I was organizing my client files that afternoon. Simple, elegant, and perfectly suited to the situation at hand. If Michael wanted to bring his mistress into our personal life, then I was going to make sure they both understood exactly what that choice would cost them. I started by calling Antonio's and speaking with James, our waiter from the anniversary dinner. He remembered us immediately, which wasn't surprising given how memorable our evening had been for all the wrong reasons. "Mrs. Martinez, how are you? I hope you and your husband enjoyed your anniversary celebration." "It was certainly unforgettable," I said. "Actually, I'm calling because my husband mentioned he'd like to bring his business partner back for dinner next week. They had such a wonderful time discussing their case. Could you help me arrange something special?" "Of course. We'd be delighted to accommodate Mr. Martinez and his colleague again." "Wonderful. I'd like to make a reservation for 2 under my husband's name for Friday evening at 8. But here's where I need your discretion, James. I want to surprise them by covering their entire bill in advance, including gratuity. Could you arrange for me to prepay everything so they can simply enjoy their meal without worrying about the check?" James was clearly touched by what he perceived as a generous gesture from a loving wife. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Mrs. Martinez. What a lovely surprise for them." "I'm hoping it will be memorable," I agreed. "But I want to make sure they don't know about this arrangement until the very end of the evening. Can you wait? Until they ask for the check to mention that it's already been taken care of?" "Absolutely. We'll make sure everything goes smoothly." After confirming the details, I hung up and moved to phase 2 of my plan. I called Michael's office, knowing he'd be in court for most of the afternoon. "Martinez, Rodriguez, and Associates," his secretary answered. "Hi, Patricia. This is Elena Martinez. Is Michael available?" "I'm sorry, Elena. He's in depositions until 5. Can I take a message?" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Rachel." "Chen. Is she available?" "Let me check. Hold on one moment." While I waited, I rehearsed what I was going to say. The tone had to be perfect. Warm but not overly friendly, confident but not aggressive. I needed Rachel to believe she was getting exactly what she wanted. "Elena?" Rachel's voice came through the phone with genuine excitement. "What a wonderful surprise. How are you?" "I'm doing well, thank you. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realize I may have been too hasty in turning down your request for decorating help." "Really?" The hope in her voice was unmistakable. "Really? I had a cancellation in my schedule, and I thought it might be fun to work together after all. But I have one condition. Anything, name it. I'd like to start by taking you to dinner. This Friday night. Just the 2 of us so we can discuss your vision for the space without any distractions. Would that work for you?" "That sounds perfect. Where were you thinking?" "Antonio's. 8 o'clock. I know it might seem strange to go back to the same place where we just had dinner with Michael, but they have a quiet corner table that's perfect for business discussions. I love it. It'll be like our little secret. Collaboration. Secret collaboration. If only she knew how right she was. Wonderful. I'll make the reservation and see you Friday night." After hanging up, I called Antonio's back and modified my reservation. Instead of a table for 2 under Michael's name, I requested a table for 3 under my name. Then I called Michael. "Elena? Is everything okay?" He sounded distracted, probably focused on his case preparation. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to let you know I won't be home for dinner Friday night. I'm meeting with a potential new client." "Oh, okay. I was actually planning to work late anyway. Rachel and I need to prep for the Morrison hearing next week." "That's perfect timing then. You 2 can grab dinner and make a night of it." "Yeah, maybe we will." I could hear the pleased surprise in his voice. His wife was conveniently absent, giving him a guilt-free evening with the woman who'd been occupying his thoughts. He probably thought it was his lucky day. "Have fun," I said sweetly. "Don't work too hard." Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper and more defined. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit carefully. A burgundy dress that complemented my complexion, heels that made me feel confident, jewelry that caught the light. I wanted to look like a woman who knew her worth. I arrived at Antonio's at 7:45 and was seated at a corner table with a perfect view of the entrance. The same table where Michael and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary, back when we still believed we had figured out the secret to lasting love. James approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Martinez, everything is arranged exactly as you requested. The bill for table 12 will be transferred to your account at the end of the evening." "Perfect. And James, when they ask for the check, I want you to tell them that Mrs. Martinez insisted on covering their dinner. Use my full name, Elena Martinez. Make sure they understand exactly who paid for their romantic evening." His eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. "Of course, ma'am. Whatever you need." At exactly 8 o'clock, Rachel walked through the door looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves perfectly. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance, expecting an intimate business dinner with her new friend and mentor. She spotted me immediately and approached with that bright smile I was beginning to recognize as her default expression when she wanted something. "Elena, you look amazing. I'm so excited about this." "Thank you. You look lovely too. Please, sit down." Rachel settled into the chair across from me, her eyes scanning the elegant dining room. "This really is a beautiful restaurant. I can see why you and Michael love it here." "It holds a lot of memories for us," I agreed. 24 years of anniversaries, celebrations, important conversations. It's where Michael proposed, actually. "How romantic! You must have so many wonderful stories from this place." "Oh, I do, including some very recent ones. The waiter brought our menus, and we made small talk while deciding what to order." Rachel was clearly working hard to be charming, asking about my business, my children, my interests. She was good at this, making people feel heard and valued, while gradually gathering information she could use later. "So tell me about your apartment," I said once we'd ordered. "What kind of aesthetic are you going for?" Rachel's face lit up as she described her vision. Modern but warm, sophisticated but comfortable. She wanted a space that would impress visitors while still feeling like home. As she talked, I found myself genuinely impressed by her taste and attention to detail. "It sounds like you have excellent instincts," I said. "You probably don't need as much help as you think you do." "That's kind of you to say, but I really value your expertise. And honestly, I'm hoping we can become real friends through this process. I know the age difference might make that seem unlikely, but I think we have more in common than people might expect." "Such as?" "We're both strong, independent women who've had to work for everything we've achieved. We both appreciate quality and craftsmanship. And we both care about Michael's happiness." There it was. The carefully planted suggestion that we were united in our concern for Michael's well-being, that what was good for Rachel was automatically good for him too. "You're very perceptive," I said. "Though I'm curious, what makes you think Michael's happiness depends on you?" Rachel's smile faltered slightly. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that we work well together. And when he's satisfied with his professional life, it benefits everyone around him." "Including his wife?" "Of course, especially his wife." I took a sip of wine and studied her face. She was smart. I had to give her that. But she was also young enough to believe that intelligence was the same thing as wisdom, that having a plan was the same thing as understanding the game she was actually playing. "Rachel, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Are you in love with my husband?" The question hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. Rachel's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned honesty. "I think Michael is an incredible man," she said carefully. "Brilliant, accomplished, generous with his knowledge and experience. Working with him has been one of the best parts of my career." "That's not what I asked." Rachel reached for her wine glass with hands that weren't quite steady. "Elena, I would never do anything to hurt your marriage. I have too much respect for both of you. Again, not what I asked. She met my eyes directly for the first time since I'd posed the question. Yes, she said quietly. I think I am falling in love with him, but I would never act on those feelings. I know he's married, and I know he loves you. Does he? Of course he does. Anyone can see how much you mean to him. I almost laughed at that. If anyone could see how much I meant to Michael, then Rachel was the only person in the restaurant who was blind to the reality of our relationship. Rachel, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. Michael doesn't love me anymore. He hasn't for quite some time. He's going through the motions of being married because it's easier than admitting our relationship is over, but his heart isn't in it. You're not threatening a happy marriage. You're just the catalyst for ending an unhappy one. She stared at me with wide eyes, clearly not expecting this level of honesty. Elena, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I'm not your enemy. I'm not going to fight you for a man who's already checked out of our relationship. But I am going to make sure that if you want him, you understand exactly what that's going to cost both of you. Before Rachel could respond, I saw Michael walk through the restaurant entrance. He looked around with the confident expectation of someone who thought he was meeting his colleague for a private work dinner. When he spotted our table, his face went through the same series of expressions Rachel's had moments earlier. He approached slowly, clearly trying to process what he was seeing. Elena? Rachel? What's going on here? Sit down, Michael, I said calmly. We need to talk. He remained standing, his eyes darting between us like he was looking for the exit in a burning building. I don't understand. Rachel said she was meeting you for dinner to discuss decorating her apartment. She is, I said. And you're here because you thought you were meeting Rachel for a work dinner. Funny how these things work out. Michael finally sat down, his face pale with the realization that he'd been outmaneuvered. Elena, if this is about the other night was just the final piece of evidence I needed to confirm what I'd already suspected. You're having an emotional affair with Rachel, and she's fallen in love with you. The only question is what we're going to do about it. The silence at our table was deafening, even with the gentle murmur of conversation from other diners around us. Rachel looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Michael kept opening and closing his mouth like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. I want you both to understand something, I continued. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm not going to beg or plead or try to convince either of you that you're making a mistake. But I am going to make sure you face the full consequences of your choices. Elena, please, Michael said finally. Can we discuss this at home? Privately? No, Michael. You made this public when you brought Rachel to our anniversary dinner. You made it public when you started spending more time with her than with me. You made it public when you moved into the guest bedroom and started living like a single man while still enjoying the benefits of being married. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table between them. These are divorce papers. I had my lawyer draw them up yesterday. Michael's face went ashen. Divorce papers? Elena, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I'm 45 years old, and I'm not going to waste whatever time I have left pretending to be married to someone who wishes he wasn't married to me. But I never said I wanted a divorce, Michael protested. You didn't have to say it, Michael. You've been showing me for months. The late nights, the separate bedrooms, the way you light up around Rachel and go dim around me. The way you talk about her innovative ideas while treating my thoughts like interruptions. The way you've essentially replaced me in every meaningful way, except legally. Rachel found her voice finally. Elena, I never meant for any of this to happen. I believe you, I said. But intention doesn't change impact. You fell in love with a married man, and instead of maintaining appropriate boundaries, you encouraged his attention. You came to our anniversary dinner and shared dessert with my husband while I watched. You called me the next day trying to manipulate me into helping you create a love nest for the two of you. Good intentions don't excuse bad choices. The waiter approached tentatively, clearly sensing the tension at our table. Is everything all right here? Can I get you anything? Actually, yes, I said with a smile. I think we're ready for the check. Oh, that won't be necessary, James said, following my earlier instructions perfectly. Mrs. Elena Martinez has already taken care of everything for table 12. She insisted on covering your entire dinner. The look on both their faces was worth every penny I'd spent on this elaborate setup. Michael's confusion, Rachel's dawning humiliation, the slow realization that they'd been played by someone they'd underestimated. Elena, Michael said slowly, what is this? This is me making sure you both understand exactly who paid for your romantic dinner together. Every bite of food, every sip of wine, every moment of intimacy you shared while thinking you were getting away with something. All courtesy of the wife you've been trying to replace. I stood up, gathering my purse and the manila envelope. The papers are straightforward, Michael. I'm asking for half of our assets, which is more than fair considering I've been subsidizing your midlife crisis. I'm keeping the house, and you're welcome to your newfound happiness with Rachel. Elena, wait, Rachel said, reaching out as if to stop me from leaving. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, Rachel. You hurt me every time you encouraged my husband's attention while pretending to be respectful of our marriage. You hurt me when you assumed I was too old and settled to be a threat to your plans. And you hurt me when you thought you could manipulate me into helping you steal my life. I turned to Michael, who was still staring at the divorce papers like they were written in a foreign language. 23 years, Michael. That's how long I spent building a life with you, supporting your dreams, raising your children, making your happiness a priority. And you threw it all away for someone you've known 8 months. Elena, please. Can't we work through this? Go to counseling or something. Counseling is for couples who want to save their marriage. You've made it clear that you want out. You just didn't have the courage to do it honestly. I'm doing you a favor by making it easy. I started to walk away, then turned back for one final observation. Oh, and Rachel? You should know that. The man you're so infatuated with hasn't been honest with you either. He told you I was boring and that we'd grown apart naturally. But the truth is, he's been planning this exit strategy for months, probably looking for someone exactly like you to make the transition easier. You're not the love of his life. You're just the excuse he needed to leave his old life behind. Rachel's face crumpled as the implications of my words sank in. Michael started to protest, but I was already walking away, leaving them to sort through the wreckage of their romantic fantasy in the restaurant where it had all begun. As I walked through Antonio's for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The intoxicating rush of being completely, authentically myself. Not the accommodating wife, not the understanding partner, not the woman who made herself smaller so others could feel bigger. Just Elena Martinez, standing up for herself in the most elegant way possible. I drove home to our empty house and poured myself a glass of wine, the same Merlot I'd been saving for special occasions. This definitely qualified. I called my daughter, Sarah, who answered on the second ring. Mom? How are you? You sound different. I'm getting divorced, sweetheart. The silence stretched for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Mom, are you serious? Completely serious. Your father has been having an emotional affair with his colleague, and I've decided I deserve better than being someone's second choice. Oh my God. Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you want me to come home? I'm more than okay, Sarah. I'm free. And no, don't come home. Stay in school. Focus on your finals. This is my journey to figure out. We talked for another hour. with Sarah alternating between shock, anger at her father, and admiration for my decision to prioritize my own happiness. When David called an hour later, clearly having heard from his sister, the conversation followed a similar pattern. Both of my children were adults now, capable of understanding that sometimes love isn't enough to sustain a marriage, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to admit when something isn't working and let it end with dignity. Michael came home around midnight, letting himself in quietly as if he were hoping to avoid a confrontation. I was sitting in our living room reading, looking as calm and composed as I felt. "Elena," he said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome in his own house anymore. "Michael, we need to talk about this, about the papers, about what happened tonight." "What's to talk about?" "You want Rachel, she wants you, and I want to be free of both of you. It seems like everyone gets what they want." He sat down across from me, looking older than his 52 years. "I never meant for it to happen this way." "How did you mean, for it to happen? Were you planning to keep us both indefinitely? String me along while you figured out whether Rachel was worth leaving me for?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Everything with Rachel just felt so fresh, new, exciting. All the things I stopped being years ago. That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Michael. It's not fair that you fell out of love with me and never told me. It's not fair that you let me keep trying to save a marriage you'd already abandoned. It's not fair that you brought another woman to our anniversary dinner and made me feel invisible in my own life." He was quiet for a long time, studying his hands like they held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "What happens now?" he said finally. "Now you pack your things and move out. You call your lawyer and we handle this divorce as civilly as possible for the sake of our children, and you figure out whether what you have with Rachel is real love or just the excitement of forbidden fruit." "And what about you?" I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. "I'm going to rediscover who Elena Martinez is when she's not trying to be the perfect wife to someone who doesn't appreciate her." Michael left the next morning with 2 suitcases and a promise to send movers for the rest of his belongings within the week. No tears, no dramatic declarations, no last-minute attempts to salvage what we'd both known was already over. Just 2 people acknowledging that sometimes loving someone means letting them go, even when, especially when, they don't have the courage to leave on their own. 6 months later, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She looked tired and stressed. Nothing like the confident young woman who'd walked into Antonio's that night thinking she was getting everything she wanted. "Elena," she said, her voice uncertain. "How are you?" "I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you and Michael?" Her smile was brittle around the edges. "We're fine, good, still figuring things out." I nodded politely. I'd heard through mutual friends that Michael's relationship with Rachel wasn't quite the fairy tale either of them had expected. Apparently, being with someone because you're running away from something else isn't the same as being with them because you genuinely want to build a life together. "Well, I hope you're both happy," I said, and I meant it. Everyone deserves to be with someone who chooses them enthusiastically. As I walked away, I thought about how much my life had changed since that devastating anniversary dinner. I'd redecorated my house exactly the way I wanted it, traveled to places Michael had never shown interest in visiting, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage, and even started dating again. For the first time in decades, I was living my life instead of just maintaining it. And I'd learned the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let their poor choices diminish your own happiness. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.